Yep, your eyes don't deceive you. I've shaved. Anyway, let's talk about Godzilla. All right, so when it comes to toy companies like Bandai, so for some of you that may or may not know, once in a while they don't do this all the time, but they'll do like a little voting poll, basically asking fans like what would be like the next figure that they would like to see, which is kind of nice, to see that because they got a huge wide range of characters, not just from Godzilla movies. Obviously, they've pretty much expanded like their toy line in general. They've done stuff like, Gamera, Shin Ultraman. I already talked about this a couple of times, so you get the idea. But definitely for sure, now they're doing like a lot more like other stuff, and that's not even counting their kings, their Monster King series. The one that they were like literally 12 inches tall. So anyway, they did a poll recently. So it was on November 3rd, Godzilla 7th anniversary, pretty neat. It was announced that Giant Condor has won, and as some of you may not know, Giant Condor is literally nothing more but just a one off character that got burnt into toast by Godzilla. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's funny for the goofiness of it because, like I say, it's not an official. Well, it's a Godzilla character for sure. Yeah, it is, but it's not part of like that lineage of like. Okay, how do I say it? DVDs. Before they were taking them off the shelves, right? So whenever you used to buy a Godzilla movie, this was like maybe the early to mid 2000s or so, maybe to a certain extent. I'm pretty sure they still do that. I mean, I don't own the Criteria collection, so I wouldn't know if they still do this. But at the back of the DVD or so, or the box set, they used to show off like what monsters you could see in the film, like what to expect. So if I were to buy Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, and at the back of it, it shows the characters that are in it. It shows Godzilla, Mechagodzilla, but then it'll show like Anguirus and King Caesar, and then you're like, oh, I didn't know they were in the movie. I kind of would have liked to not know that, you know. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say, that's like a Toho thing for sure, because obviously you don't see any other companies doing that with their movies and stuff. That's definitely like very specified for some reason. That's always been like a huge thing. It's like a trademark thing or whatever. I'm not exactly sure why they do it. But long story short, Giant Condor is not on there, so it's like okay, great to see that he's getting his own figure. I mean, look, I'm a hypocrite because I voted too, So okay, it's not a huge surprise that this got a figure, and I'm honestly the part that shocks me the most, honestly, is I'm generally surprised that there hasn't been like backlash or anything like that because remember there were a huge selection of characters, so any of them could have gotten their figure. So out of all of them, why did this weird wacky one got is getting his own vinyl figure, but not all these other ones that are technically slightly more cooler, right? So we're not really talking about Giant Condor today. We're just mostly talking about the other figures that, let's be honest, they kind of deserved it more. But there's a pretty obvious reason why they probably didn't win, And I'm just gonna say right now, obviously these figures they're gonna get made either way. It's just gonna take time, unfortunately. So we can only I don't know. So basically, we're gonna go over the list as to what was on the list of the the votes. Oh man. Luckily, this isn't the election. Anyway, yeah. So literally, they have a whole selection of characters. Like there was a lot of them. I literally had to write them down because there was no way I was gonna remember all of them. Not to mention that they were very, very specific too. So I'm just gonna tell you all of them right now. So on the list of figures that the votings and all that, here is our choices. This is what was on there, right? So we had King Caesar, but it's like a flocked version, basically. If you don't know what flocking is, it's like a weird specific kind of like furry texture basically that they use. I don't really know exactly like a good example. The only one that I could think of is back during the old days of Playmates toys with their Ninja Turtle stuff. They made a figure called Movie Star Splinter, and that he had like an action feature that he had like flocked fur, but it wasn't like all furry and stuff. It wasn't like you could like kind of feel it. It was like a very, very smooth type fur, and it was definitely one where it wouldn't really wither over time. Another perfect example, actually, and this is one I just thought of right now, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, their Moss Man figure. The only problem, technically, that's flocking, the technique that they used to make the figures. But, well, first of all, when the figure first came out in the 80s, The flockingness didn't really last very long. It fell apart on the character, so it's hard to find a Moss Man nowadays in a perfect condition. You're better off just getting the Origins version. Honestly, that's the more updated version. That's based off of their Masters of the Universe Origins lineup, where that figure, he's literally like covered in moss, but it looks so perfect. But unfortunately, he costs around $40 because to get the cost of moss is very expensive. So I can only imagine if King Caesar were to win, probably would have been a pretty big penny. So I don't know about that. Uh, could would have been nice to see though, if I'm being honest. I'm kind of curious to how that would look now. I mean, I do have the movie monster series King Caesar. I'm just saying. But anyway, next one. This is a big one. Daisy Ghidorah. I hope I'm saying that right. Deza Ghidorah. Basically it's King Ghidorah, but he's a giant devil instead of a space monster. I don't know. Basically, he first appeared in Rebirth of Mothra. Now, obviously, this is a very interesting interpretation of King Ghidorah. Now, obviously, it's been a while since I watched the movie, so obviously, I know that the origin story for that particular version of Ghidorah is going to be very different. And obviously, he's meant to be completely different from what King Ghidorah was, which sounds kind of weird because obviously if you watch Rebirth of Mothra 3, you would know that, I don't know, I guess King Ghidorah's backstory, it's like a lot more wilder than we would have thought. I mean, it's like something else. This isn't even like, this is not the same one from the Heisei, like the Godzilla Heisei films, and this is definitely not the same one from the Showa era. So, I don't know. Still would have been nice to see though. That's like a really like wicked cool design, like for real. That would have been very nice to see, obviously, but I don't know. I mean, basically think of it like, I don't want to say it's like, well, is it like Monster X? I don't know. It's hard to really explain the design because definitely he's a big giant character for sure, and all the crazy designs and all that. I mean, it literally he's like, wow, that I think for sure should have gotten spotlight, But let's go over the rest of the list because there's a lot more. Orga, from Godzilla 2000. I mean, that's a pretty simple one. I mean, it would have been nice to see it still, but I mean, it's not a huge big deal. The next one though is pretty interesting. Space Godzilla, but in his flying form. So obviously, if you watch Godzilla versus Space Godzilla, it's a very weird, film in the series where it goes for a more like definitely deep into its like sci-fi and mysticalness, if that makes sense. I don't even know if that's a word. Basically, instead of making a new Mecha Godzilla, they made Moguera, and obviously that's meant to like defeat Godzilla, kind of. I don't know. Basically, what they did, they sent it to outer space because they detected something pretty weird, and that thing just so happens to be a space Godzilla. And basically, it was created with like the DNA of like Biolante and a little bit of like Mothra or so, and obviously combine that with Godzilla's DNA, and then it's in space, so it's like, okay, it's Space Godzilla, I mean, it's cool, don't get me wrong, but this is him in his flying form because obviously the biggest thing that they put, like, that they emphasize the most is that he's all crystals, his spines and all that, ginormous crystals, even on his shoulders too. So it's like, wow, and obviously during his flying form, he looks pretty weird. It's like he's flying, but then he got like a whole ginormous, like, he got like crystals growing, and it looks weird, it looks crazy for sure. uh I think the only problem though is how big would it be? Because even though most Godzilla figures from the toy line are somewhat size accurate, not all of them obviously. So I could have only imagined, because technically when he's in his flying form, he's definitely a lot more bigger than Godzilla, but like big, big. So I can only imagine how would that go on in figure form. Don't get me wrong, they did made a 1974 Mechagodzilla in his flying form as well, but that one is much more simpler, and you could definitely see that one working out. Such a nice figure, but I think it's a Godzilla store exclusive. I'm not exactly sure. Oh man, that's a hard one to get, which is unfortunate. But it is what it is, I guess. So now next up, it's Eternal Mothra. So not it's not Rainbow Mothra, it's Eternal Mothra. So of course this is from Rebirth of Mothra 3. I'm assuming. I don't know. I mean, to be fair, it would be nice to see a new Mothra figure, but I think the obvious reason for why this one probably didn't get chosen is because that they'll probably paint like the front view, like when she's not flying. But like if you look underneath her, she's probably gonna be like unpainted as hell because a lot of their figures are like that. Even like Batra in his flying form too. I remember like there's like the bottom part that's unpainted, but it's like if you want to like hang him or something, it just looks really ugly. It doesn't look right. You'll know what I mean if you own those figures, but I'm just saying that I could definitely see why I got a pass. Of course, the next one was Giant Condor, which is the biggest winner, so we don't gotta talk about that because I already made like 2 videos talking about it. But you know what? I don't care. I'll make as many videos as I want. You know, listen, I love Godzilla, so why not? You know, if I could talk about Marvel all the time, and if I could talk about maybe, okay, well, I haven't really talked about Masters of the Universe that much or DC Multiverse, but you get the idea, you know. So next one is Moguera, but it's not the 1994 Moguera. This is the one based off of the Mysterians film. So it's like the original one from like 1957. I don't know. That's a really weird one, you know. Obviously, how do I explain that? It's a really weird choice. Kind of would have been nice to see it, but the character in particular was never really in a Godzilla movie except for Godzilla versus Space Godzilla. That was like the one exception. But the designs and even the backstory is so different. You might as well consider them 2 different characters. Now, I don't know if this is true, but I think originally a long time ago when they were making, the movie Destroy All Monsters, I think they wanted to include that original version of Moguera in it, but I'm not entirely sure. Only because the history of that film is so like all over the place. Because the movie was supposed to be a lot more bigger than what it was when it came out in 1968, but unfortunately, due to costs and all that, they couldn't really put all those monsters in there. They wanted to put like the Gargantuan brothers, heck, I even heard they wanted to put King Kong too, but they couldn't do that because by that point they don't have the rights to the character no more. So that was unfortunate. And you can tell too that the movie had a rough time because you had characters like Varen, where he's all over the posters, he's mentioned in the movie, but he's literally only in it for like maybe 9 or 10 seconds. I don't know, in the form of a cameo. Like, it is so sad. And that was the character's like only appearance in a Godzilla movie, which is, I don't know, it's kind of weird because Varen also got his own movie, but it was kind of unrelated to Godzilla. It's part of that weird timeline where like you had a whole bunch of giant monster movies that were originally not Godzilla movies, and then eventually these characters did appear in a Godzilla movie. So of course, for an example, Rodan, he appeared in his own film with no association with Godzilla. There's no like mentioning of Godzilla. It's meant to be its own film, but eventually that was changed to where in 1964 1965 when we got the movie Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, that was when Rodan would make his official appearance in the Godzilla franchise. And of course, I guess you could say that now the original Rodan film is canon. I guess. I don't know. Speaking of Rodan, 1956 Rodan was actually on this list too. And I was shocked. I was like, oh, now I get it. So you mean to tell me that after all these years, now you finally decide to make an original 1956 Rodan? Guess what? It's too late. Because Playmates beat you to it. They actually did made a 1956 Rodan figure, and this is honestly is like the best figure ever. It looks just like the movie. It's surprisingly. I mean, this I don't know what this is about. This blue paint. I'm not. It was. I don't know if that was part of the original film. Don't get me wrong. If Bandai did made their own version, obviously it probably would have been a little better than this one, but I don't know. It just sucks that why is it that Playmates managed to, be at the helm and make their own version of Rodan when Bandai had plenty enough time to do it. Don't get me wrong, the Playmates, the Godzilla classics, and the Bandai creations and the movie monster series, they're technically like the same toy line. It is the same toy line, but they're made kind of different. You know what I mean? It's like, it's confusing. Very confusing. That's definitely a topic for another day. So we're almost towards the end. There's only like 2 contestants left. The Dough Rats. Okay. Remember Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah from 1991? And remember how it was just so weird how King Ghidorah basically had a completely brand new backstory where he was originally like these 3 cute little creatures, the Dough Rats, and then instead of getting hit with the hydrogen bombs and all that, it was him instead. But obviously, it was weird because King Ghidorah has always been known to be a space monster, so for this interpretation to not be one was kind of weird. So, I don't know. A Dough Rat, I mean, they're very innocent creatures. Obviously, they're not exactly like the giant monster type. You know, they're not maliciously evil, if that makes sense. You know, it's kind of weird to imagine them in figure form, especially considering they're not kaiju's. They're not like, I mean, they are kaiju's, they are, but like they're not giant size. They're not over here destroying buildings and all that. They're not Manila, is basically what I'm trying to say, and that says a lot considering that not a lot of people really like Manila, which is kind of unfortunate, but you know, it is what it is, I guess. To kind of give you an idea, I have this Wolverine figure, you know, regular size. Though rats, realistically, they're very small. So I can only imagine make a kaiju figure that destroys buildings, and you got like the, I don't know, it feels weird. I know the movie Monster Series, they've done that a couple of times with some of their other stuff, not really related to the Godzilla movies, you know, specifically, but you get the idea. So let's get to the last one. The Mecha Godzilla from 1975, and this is the one with the head controller. What I mean by that is, well, after the massive success of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla back in 1974, they made a continuation called Terror of Mechagodzilla, in which he returns, but it's like another version, and now he's working together with another kaiju called Titanosaurus, which is like the most batshit insane kaiju for sure. Like, Titanosaurus was brutal. Why wasn't he the main villain? But basically, when Godzilla was fighting Mechagodzilla, basically his head got knocked down. You would think that Mechagodzilla would die again the same way that he did in the last film. No, now he had like this weird little extra piece where it's like, oh, okay, you beat me the first time, but you won't beat me the second time. I mean, that would have been interesting to see, if I'm being honest. But obviously, there's not really that much of a difference, like sculpt wise. It's pretty much almost the same body like the first Mechagodzilla, with the exception that I think he has like a two like on the shoulder or so, and maybe a slightly more different design. Not exactly too sure. I mean, listen, all I'm gonna say is there was a lot of good ones in this list, and then there was a lot where it was like, you know, but I don't know. This is what we would have gotten, folks. So I don't know. What do you think? Does Giant Condor still deserves the recognition he's getting right now, or do you think that it's bullshit that these other figures didn't get their own? You know, that they didn't win. Basically, you know, that's what I'm trying to say. I think the reason why a lot of people are not too worried about this, it's because these figures will get released at some point. It just sucks that it probably is going to take like maybe a year or so. But listen, who knows? I would have never thought that they would make a 1955 Godzilla figure or a 1955 Anguirus. I would have never thought that. I want those figures. I really do. Those are classics, and they're generally awesome figures to have. And yes, I would review them, even if my reviews don't get a lot of views. You know, look, I will definitely take a look at them for sure because hey, that's what I like. So until then, that's about it for now. Thank you guys for joining in. So there might or might not be a toy hunt later today. I don't know. Depends on how things go around today, you know. So yeah, so that's about it. So thank you guys for watching. Same as always, leave a like and subscribe. Hit the notification button if you want to, you know, and that's about it. See ya.